The rain hammered against the windows of the military training facility as Sarah Chen stepped off the transport bus. Her small frame was dwarfed by the massive concrete building that would be her home for the next 6 months. At 22, she looked even younger than her years, with delicate features that seemed more suited to a college campus than a military base. The other recruits towered over her as they filed into the processing center, their voices already forming the bonds of brotherhood that she suspected would exclude her. "Look at that," whispered Marcus Rivera, a burly man from Texas whose biceps strained against his civilian shirt. "Did someone's little sister get lost on the way to summer camp?" His comment drew snickers from the group of men surrounding him, all of whom had clearly spent years preparing their bodies for military service. Sarah kept her eyes forward, her jaw set in a line of determination that had carried her through countless challenges before. She had grown up in a small town where being different meant being a target, and military training was just another mountain to climb. Her father had been career military, and, despite his initial protests about his daughter following in his footsteps, he had eventually supported her decision. "The military isn't about size," he had told her. "It's about heart, mind, and will. You've got all three in abundance." The processing line moved slowly, giving the recruits plenty of time to size each other up. Behind Marcus stood Jake Thompson, a former college football player whose confidence radiated from every pore. Next to him was David Kim, whose quiet intensity suggested a background in martial arts. The few women in the group clustered together, but even they seemed to view Sarah with skepticism. At 5 feet 2 inches and barely 110 pounds, she looked like a strong wind could knock her over. "Attention!" The voice of Drill Sergeant Williams cut through the chatter like a knife through butter. "Welcome to Fort Braxton, ladies and gentlemen. For the next 24 weeks, this will be your home, your school, and your hell. Some of you will make it through. Some of you will not. Those who do will earn the right to wear the uniform of the United States Army. Those who don't will learn valuable lessons about their limitations." Williams was a mountain of a man, his chest decorated with ribbons that spoke of service in multiple combat zones. His eyes swept over the group of recruits, pausing briefly on each face as if making mental notes about their potential. When his gaze fell on Sarah, she saw something flicker across his features, not quite sympathy, but perhaps understanding. "You will be assigned to barracks alphabetically," Williams continued. "Chen, you're in Bay 7. Rivera, Thompson, Kim, you're all in Bay 5. Formation is at 0500 hours sharp. Anyone who is late will discover that I have a very creative imagination when it comes to physical conditioning." As the recruits dispersed to their assigned quarters, Sarah found herself walking alone toward Bay 7. The whispers followed her like a shadow, speculation about how long she would last and whether she should even be there. She had heard it all before, in high school when she tried out for the debate team and was told she was too quiet, in college when professors assumed she was majoring in something more suitable for someone of her size and background. Bay 7 turned out to be a long room lined with metal bunk beds and standard-issue footlockers. Sarah's bunkmate was Angela Rodriguez, a sturdy woman from New Mexico who looked like she could handle herself in any situation. Angela's greeting was polite but reserved, clearly waiting to see what kind of person she would be living with for the next 6 months. "So what made you join up?" Angela asked as they unpacked their belongings into the sparse metal lockers. "Family tradition," Sarah replied simply. "My father served, my grandfather served. It felt like the right path." Angela nodded but didn't probe further. In the military, everyone had their reasons, and not everyone wanted to share them immediately. As they arranged their gear according to the precise specifications outlined in their welcome packets, other women filtered into the bay. There was Jennifer Walsh from Ohio, whose nervous energy suggested she was having second thoughts about her decision. Maria Santos from California carried herself with the confidence of someone who had grown up in a tough neighborhood. Lisa Park from Oregon had the lean build of a distance runner. The first few days at Fort Braxton were a blur of paperwork, medical examinations, and equipment distribution. Sarah received her uniforms, boots, and gear with the same quiet efficiency that characterized everything she did. While other recruits complained about the early wake-up calls and the constant demands of their drill instructors, she adapted quickly to the routine. Her small size actually proved advantageous in some areas. She could navigate obstacle courses with an agility that larger recruits couldn't match. But it was during the first week of physical training that the real challenges began. The morning runs were brutal affairs, with Drill Sergeant Williams setting a pace that pushed everyone to their limits. Sarah's shorter stride meant she had to work twice as hard to keep up with the pack, her lungs burning as she fought to match the rhythm of much larger recruits. The men in her training company began to pull ahead consistently, their longer legs eating up distance with apparent ease.
"Come on, Shan,"
Williams would shout as she struggled to maintain pace.
"Your enemy won't slow down because you're having a bad day."
The weight training sessions were even more challenging. While Marcus Rivera bench pressed twice his body weight with casual ease, Sarah struggled with the standard requirements. The barbells seemed impossibly heavy in her hands, and she could feel the eyes of her fellow recruits tracking her every movement. Some watched with genuine concern, wondering if she would be able to meet the minimum standards. Others watched with barely concealed amusement, already writing her off as someone who would wash out within the first month.
"I don't know why they even let people like her try,"
Jake Thompson muttered during a break between exercises.
"This isn't a game.
People's lives depend on soldiers being able to carry their weight."
The comment stung because Sarah knew there was truth in it.
Military service wasn't about participation trophies or equal opportunity, it was about life and death, about being able to rely on the person next to you when everything went wrong. She understood the skepticism of her fellow recruits, even as she resented their assumptions about her capabilities.
Combat training presented its own unique challenges. Hand-to-hand combat exercises paired recruits against each other to practice basic defensive and offensive techniques.
When Sarah was matched against Marcus Rivera for the first time, the size difference was so dramatic that even the instructors seemed uncomfortable. Marcus outweighed her by at least 80 pounds and had reach advantages that made competition almost impossible.
"Take it easy on her, Rivera," Sergeant Johnson instructed. "This is about learning technique, not proving who's tougher."
But Marcus seemed to view the exercise as an opportunity to make a point about physical standards. His attacks were controlled but forceful, designed to demonstrate the futility of Sarah's position. When she attempted to use leverage and speed to compensate for her size disadvantage, he simply overpowered her attempts with brute strength.
"See," he said loud enough for others to hear as Sarah picked herself up from the mat for the third time. "This is exactly what I'm talking about."
In real combat, technique only goes so far when you're outclassed physically. The evening hours in the barracks became a refuge for Sarah, a time when she could process the challenges of each day and prepare mentally for the next. She spent hours studying field manuals and tactical guides, determined to excel in areas where physical size mattered less than knowledge and intelligence. Her test scores were consistently among the highest in the company, earning grudging respect from instructors even if they didn't translate to acceptance from her peers.
Angela proved to be a steady source of support during those early weeks. Unlike some of the other recruits, she didn't offer false encouragement or pretend that the challenges Sarah faced weren't real. Instead, she provided practical advice and honest feedback.
"You're trying to fight their fight," Angela observed one evening as Sarah nursed bruised ribs from another combat exercise.
"But maybe that's not the right approach.
You're never going to outmuscle Marcus or outrun Jake on pure power."
"But you've got something they don't." "What's that?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious.
"You're invisible to them," Angela replied. "They underestimate you so completely that they don't bother to guard against your strengths."
That could be an advantage if you figure out how to use it. The observation stuck with Sarah as she continued through the grueling days of basic training.
She began to study her fellow recruits as carefully as she studied her field manuals, noting their patterns and weaknesses. Marcus was physically dominant but relied too heavily on intimidation. Jake was fast and strong but became overconfident when he thought he had an advantage. David was technically proficient but sometimes hesitated when forced to make quick decisions. Meanwhile, the mockery continued with depressing regularity. During mess hall meals, conversations would stop when she approached tables, resuming in whispers once she passed.
Equipment inspections became exercises in finding fault with her gear arrangement or uniform appearance.
Some recruits began placing bets on when she would finally admit defeat and request a discharge. "I give her 2 more weeks," Jennifer Walsh confided to Maria Santos during a break between training exercises.
The physical requirements are only going to get harder from here. But Sarah had no intention of quitting. Each morning she woke before reveille to do extra conditioning work. Each evening she stayed up late studying manuals and memorizing procedures. She began to volunteer for additional duties and training opportunities, gradually building a reputation for reliability and competence that even her harshest critics couldn't ignore. The breakthrough came during the 4th week of training, during a complex navigation exercise in the woods surrounding Fort Braxton. Recruits were given maps, compasses, and coordinates for a series of checkpoints they needed to reach within a specified time frame. The exercise was designed to test not only navigation skills but also physical endurance and mental resilience. Sarah's smaller size actually proved advantageous in the dense woodland environment. She could move through thick underbrush that forced larger recruits to find alternate routes. Her careful study of topographical maps allowed her to identify shortcuts that others missed. Most importantly, her methodical approach to navigation meant she didn't make the costly errors that sent other recruits wandering in circles. When the exercise concluded, Sarah had not only completed the course within the time limit but had actually finished 3rd overall, ahead of much larger and, apparently stronger recruits. The accomplishment was impossible to dismiss or explain away, and, for the first time, some of her fellow recruits began to view her with something approaching respect rather than pity. "Not bad, Chen," Marcus admitted grudgingly as they gathered for the debriefing session. "I guess size isn't everything after all."
It was a small victory, but Sarah savored it as she prepared for the challenges that lay ahead. She was beginning to understand that success in military training wasn't just about meeting physical standards, it was about finding ways to contribute that played to your strengths while continuously working to improve your weaknesses. The mockery hadn't stopped entirely, but it had evolved from casual dismissal to something more thoughtful and measured. As the weeks passed and training intensified, Sarah continued to prove that determination and intelligence could sometimes compensate for physical limitations. But she also knew that her biggest test still lay ahead, and that earning the respect of her fellow recruits was only the first step in a much longer journey. The obstacle course stretched before the recruits like a medieval torture device designed by someone with a twisted sense of humor and an intimate knowledge of human limitations. Rope climbs, wall traversals, crawling sections, and balance beams created a gauntlet that had broken the spirit of countless soldiers over the years. Sarah stood at the starting line with her training company, watching as other groups ahead of them tackled the course with varying degrees of success and failure. "Today we separate the wheat from the chaff," Drill Sergeant Williams announced, his voice carrying across the training field with military precision. "This course will test everything you've learned over the past 2 months. Speed, strength, endurance, and, most importantly, the will to push through when your body tells you to quit." The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine trees and the distant sound of artillery practice from another part of the base. Sarah had been dreading this day since she first saw the obstacle course during orientation. Every element seemed designed to favor larger, stronger recruits, and she knew that her performance here would either validate her place in the company or confirm the doubts that still lingered among her peers. Marcus Rivera stepped up to the starting line first, his confidence radiating like heat from a bonfire. At 6 feet 3 inches and 200 pounds of muscle, he was built like the course had been designed with him in mind. The whistle blew and he attacked the first obstacle with aggressive efficiency, powering over walls and through tunnels with raw strength and determination. His time was impressive but not exceptional, fast enough to meet standards but lacking the fluid grace that separated good soldiers from great ones. Jake Thompson followed with similar results, his football background evident in the way he approached each challenge like an opposing defensive line. David Kim moved through the course with mechanical precision, his martial arts training apparent in his balance and body control. One by one, the male recruits completed their runs, some with distinction and others with just enough competence to avoid remedial training. The women in the company faced additional scrutiny as they took their turns. Angela Rodriguez attacked the course with gritty determination, her compact frame and farm girl strength serving her well on most obstacles. Jennifer Walsh struggled with the upper body requirements but managed to complete the course within acceptable parameters. Maria Santos moved with surprising speed and agility, earning respectful nods from the observing instructors.
Then, it was Sarah's turn. She approached the starting line with the same quiet focus that characterized everything she did, blocking out the whispered conversations and sideways glances from her fellow recruits. Some were genuinely curious to see how she would handle the physical demands. Others were clearly expecting failure, their expressions suggesting they viewed her attempt as little more than an amusing interlude before the serious training resumed. "Ready on the line," Sergeant Johnson called out, his stopwatch poised to begin timing. Sarah took a deep breath and visualized the course layout she had memorized during countless study sessions. Every obstacle had been analyzed and planned for, every transition between challenges mapped out in her mind. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, not just physically but mentally and strategically. The whistle shrieked across the training field. Sarah exploded from the starting line with surprising speed, her shorter stride compensated by rapid turnover and efficient movement. The first obstacle was a series of low hurdles that favored quick feet over raw power, and she cleared them with balletic precision. The watching recruits murmured with surprise. They had expected her to struggle immediately, but instead she was moving with fluid grace. The rope climb loomed ahead, 30 feet of rough hemp that had defeated stronger candidates. Sarah approached it with a technique she had practiced obsessively in the gym, using her legs and core strength to supplement her limited upper body power. Instead of trying to muscle her way up like the men before her, she employed a climbing method that maximized efficiency and minimized energy expenditure. Her ascent was steady and controlled, lacking the dramatic speed of Marcus's climb but demonstrating superior technique. "Look at her go," Angela whispered to Maria, both women watching with growing amazement. The wall traverse came next, a 20-foot horizontal climb that required sustained grip strength and upper body endurance. This was where Sarah expected to face her greatest challenge, and where most observers expected her to fail. The obstacle had a reputation for defeating smaller recruits, and several people had already written off her chances of completion. But Sarah had spent months preparing for this specific challenge. She had studied videos of successful techniques, practiced grip strength exercises until her hands were raw, and developed a movement pattern that relied on precise body positioning rather than brute force. As she began the traverse, her movements were economical and purposeful, each hand placement calculated to minimize strain and maximize stability. Halfway across the traverse, she could hear the stunned silence from the group of watching recruits. Even the instructors were paying closer attention now, recognizing that they were witnessing something unexpected. Sarah's technique was flawless, her breathing controlled, her progress steady and relentless. The crawling section that followed played to her size advantages, allowing her to move through tight spaces with an efficiency that larger recruits couldn't match. She navigated the low obstacles like a dancer, her compact frame allowing for movements that would have been impossible for someone of Marcus's size. By the time she reached the final series of obstacles, Sarah had not only avoided failure but was actually maintaining a competitive pace. The balance beam, rope swing, and wall climb that concluded the course presented their own challenges, but she tackled each one with the same methodical preparation and precise execution that had carried her through the earlier sections. As she crossed the finish line, Sergeant Johnson clicked his stopwatch and stared at the display with obvious surprise. The time wasn't just acceptable, it was actually among the better performances of the day. More importantly, her technique had been nearly flawless, demonstrating a level of preparation and skill that commanded respect. "Outstanding performance, Chen," Drill Sergeant Williams said as Sarah caught her breath at the finish line. That was textbook execution from start to finish. The reaction from her fellow recruits was a mixture of amazement, respect, and grudging admiration. Marcus Rivera stood with his mouth slightly open, clearly struggling to reconcile what he had just witnessed with his preconceptions about physical limitations. Jake Thompson was nodding slowly, the expression of someone forced to re-evaluate his assumptions. Even Jennifer Walsh, who had been among Sarah's harshest critics, looked impressed despite herself. "I don't believe it," David Kim said to no one in particular. "She made that look easy." But not everyone was ready to abandon their skepticism. Later that evening in the mess hall, a group of recruits gathered around Marcus's table engaged in animated discussion about the day's events. While some were willing to acknowledge Sarah's impressive performance, others searched for ways to diminish or explain away her success. "The obstacle course is just one test," insisted Tom Bradley,
a recruit from Michigan whose own performance had been mediocre. It doesn't prove she can handle real combat situations or carry her weight in actual military operations. She got lucky, added Frank Morrison, whose struggle with the rope climb had been painful to watch. The course played to her strengths. But what happens when she needs to carry a wounded soldier to safety or haul heavy equipment under fire? These conversations reached Sarah's ears, as such conversations always did in the close quarters of military training. While she was gratified by her obstacle course success, she understood that one good performance wouldn't be enough to silence all doubts about her capabilities. If anything, her success had raised the stakes. Now she was expected to prove that it wasn't a fluke. The next phase of training focused on weapons handling and marksmanship, areas where physical size theoretically mattered less than skill and precision. Sarah approached these challenges with the same methodical preparation that had served her well on the obstacle course. She studied ballistics manuals, practiced breathing techniques, and spent extra hours on the firing range working to perfect her shooting stance and trigger control. Her natural steadiness and attention to detail proved to be significant advantages in marksmanship training. While larger recruits sometimes struggled with the fine motor control required for precision shooting, Sarah's smaller hands and patient temperament allowed her to achieve consistent accuracy. Her groupings at various distances were among the tightest in the company, earning praise from weapons instructors who had initially been skeptical of her potential. "Shen's got natural shooter instincts," Sergeant Martinez observed during a range session. "Some people can be taught to shoot accurately, but she's got the kind of hand-eye coordination you can't train." The compliment felt especially meaningful because it came from an instructor with a reputation for harsh criticism and impossibly high standards. Sergeant Martinez was a former sniper whose own marksmanship skills were legendary throughout the base. For him to single out Sarah's shooting ability was validation of the highest order. But, even as she excelled in some areas, other challenges continued to test her resolve and highlight her physical limitations. Combat load exercises required recruits to carry full gear over long distances, simulating the real-world demands of military operations. Sarah's pack weighed nearly half her body weight, making each step a tremendous effort that left her exhausted and sore. During field exercises that combined multiple skills, navigation, marksmanship, physical endurance, and tactical thinking, Sarah found herself working harder than anyone else just to keep up with the group. While her teammates could rely on natural physical advantages to compensate for minor errors or inefficiencies, she had no such margin for mistake. Every decision had to be perfect, every movement precisely calculated. The psychological pressure was as challenging as the physical demands. Sarah could feel the constant scrutiny from instructors and fellow recruits, the sense that her every action was being evaluated not just on its own merits but as evidence of whether women of her size belonged in military service. A mistake that would be forgiven or overlooked in a larger recruit became ammunition for critics who questioned her presence. "She's holding the whole company back," Frank Morrison complained after a particularly difficult field exercise where Sarah's slower pace had affected the group's overall performance. "We're only as fast as our slowest member, and she's definitely the weak link." These criticisms weren't entirely unfair, and Sarah knew it. There were situations where her physical limitations did impact the team's performance, and she struggled with the knowledge that her presence sometimes made things more difficult for her fellow recruits. The weight of that responsibility added another layer of stress to an already demanding training environment. But she also began to notice that her contributions in other areas were becoming increasingly valuable to the team's success. Her superior navigation skills had prevented the group from getting lost on multiple occasions. Her marksmanship accuracy had earned maximum points during team shooting competitions. Most importantly, her meticulous preparation and attention to detail had caught errors and oversights that could have led to serious problems during exercises. "You know," Angela observed one evening as they cleaned their weapons after a long day of training, "I think people are starting to realize that strength isn't the only thing that matters. Your brain is just as important as your biceps." The comment reflected a gradual shift in attitude that Sarah had begun to notice among some of her fellow recruits. While the skeptics remained vocal, a growing number of soldiers were beginning to appreciate the diverse skills and perspectives that different team members brought to military operations. Her success wasn't changing everyone's mind, but it was forcing thoughtful people to reconsider their assumptions about what made an effective soldier. As the training program moved into its middle phase, the challenges became increasingly complex and realistic. Urban warfare simulations, survival exercises, and leadership rotations tested every aspect of their military education. Sarah approached each new challenge with the same combination of careful preparation and stubborn determination that had carried her through earlier obstacles. Her confidence was growing, but she also understood that her biggest test still lay ahead. The respect she had earned was fragile and conditional, dependent on continued success in increasingly difficult circumstances. One significant failure could undo months of progress and validate every criticism that had been leveled against her from the beginning. The simulation village sprawled across 10 acres of carefully constructed battlefield terrain, complete with buildings, vehicles, and hidden positions designed to replicate the chaos of urban combat. After 4 months of intensive training, the recruits were about to face their most challenging test yet, a 3-day exercise that would determine who had the mental toughness and tactical skills to succeed in real military operations. Sarah stood with her assigned squad in the pre-dawn darkness, studying the mission briefing by flashlight. Their objective was to locate and neutralize hostile forces that had taken control of the village while minimizing civilian casualties and avoiding detection by enemy patrols. It was the kind of complex, multi-layered scenario that had no simple solutions and required perfect coordination between team members. Squad leader Rodriguez, no relation to Angela, was a staff sergeant with combat experience in Afghanistan whose weathered face and 1,000-yard stare spoke of situations far more serious than training exercises. He studied his assigned personnel with the calculating gaze of someone who understood that successful missions depended on knowing each soldier's capabilities and limitations. "Listen up," Rodriguez said in a voice that commanded immediate attention. "This exercise will test everything you've learned over the past 4 months. The opposing force knows we're coming and they've had time to prepare defensive positions. Intelligence suggests they have superior numbers and home field advantage. Our only advantages are training, teamwork, and the element of surprise." Sarah's squad consisted of 6 recruits who represented a cross-section of the training company's personalities and abilities. Marcus Rivera had been selected for his physical strength and aggressive mindset. David Kim brought martial arts expertise and tactical thinking. Jennifer Walsh had proven herself capable of steady performance under pressure. Tony Salvatore from New Jersey had demonstrated leadership potential during previous exercises. And Sarah rounded out the group with her navigation skills and marksmanship accuracy. The combination wasn't entirely harmonious. Marcus still harbored doubts about having Sarah on a combat team, and he wasn't shy about expressing those concerns. During the planning phase, he questioned whether she could keep up during rapid movement between positions or provide effective covering fire if the squad came under heavy attack. "I'm not trying to be difficult," he said during a tactical discussion, "but we need to be realistic about our capabilities. If shooting starts, everyone needs to be able to pull their weight." "Chen's proven herself on the range," David interjected. "Her accuracy scores are better than yours." "Range shooting is different from combat shooting," Marcus replied. "When bullets are flying and adrenaline is pumping, everything changes. Size and strength matter when you need to move fast or fight your way out of a tight spot." The debate reflected tensions that ran throughout the training company as the exercises became more realistic and demanding. Some recruits had grown to respect Sarah's contributions and view her as a valuable team member. Others remained convinced that her physical limitations would prove decisive in high-pressure situations. Squad leader Rodriguez ended the discussion with characteristic bluntness. "I don't care about anyone's personal opinions," he said. "Chen is part of this squad because her test scores and performance evaluations earned her the spot. If anyone has a problem with that, you can explain it to me after the exercise is complete." The mission began at 0400 hours with a 5-mile approach march through dense woodland. Sarah's pack felt impossibly heavy in the darkness, loaded with ammunition, water, rations, and specialized equipment necessary for the 3-day operation. Her shorter stride meant she had to work harder to maintain the squad's pace, but months of conditioning had improved her endurance significantly. Navigation through the unfamiliar terrain required constant attention to compass readings and landmark identification. Sarah found herself naturally falling into the role of backup navigator, double-checking route selection and helping to prevent the navigation errors that had derailed other squads during previous exercises. "Turn 15 degrees left," she whispered to Rodriguez as they approached a stream crossing.
"The map shows a bridge about 200 meters downstream that'll keep us out of the water."
The suggestion proved sound, allowing the squad to maintain dry feet and silent movement while other teams were forced to make noisy water crossings that could have compromised their positions. It was the kind of small advantage that might prove crucial in a real combat situation. As dawn broke over the simulation village, the squad established an observation post on a hillside overlooking their target area.
Through binoculars, they could see enemy positions and patrol patterns that would need to be neutralized or avoided.
The opposing force was played by experienced soldiers from other units who brought real combat experience to their roles as hostile actors. "Sniper position in the church bell tower," Sarah observed, studying the village through her scope. "Two-man machine gun team behind the sandbags at the main intersection.
Roving patrol with 3 personnel making circuits every 20 minutes.
Her ability to spot and catalog enemy positions impressed even Marcus, who had to admit that her patience and attention to detail were valuable assets. While other team members focused on obvious targets and threats, Sarah noticed subtle indicators that revealed hidden positions and concealed weaknesses in the enemy's defensive setup. The first phase of the mission required infiltrating the village perimeter without being detected by enemy sentries.
This meant moving through open terrain with minimal cover, relying on stealth and timing to avoid observation.
Sarah's smaller profile actually proved advantageous during this phase, allowing her to use concealment that wouldn't have hidden larger team members.
"Shen, you take point," Rodriguez decided.
"Your size will make you harder to spot, and your navigation skills will keep us on the right route."
Leading the squad through hostile territory was both terrifying and exhilarating.
Every shadow could hide an enemy position, every sound could signal detection and failure. Sarah moved with careful precision, testing each footstep and constantly scanning for threats while maintaining awareness of her team's position behind her. The infiltration was successful, placing the squad in position to begin the complex urban operations that formed the heart of the exercise. Building clearing, room-to-room searches, and hostage rescue scenarios tested every aspect of their training while enemy forces actively tried to counter their movements. During the first building clearing operation, Sarah's marksmanship skills proved decisive. As the squad moved through a multi-story structure, they encountered a sniper position that commanded the stairwell leading to the upper floors. Marcus and David attempted to suppress the position with automatic weapons fire, but the enemy's protected location made direct assault extremely dangerous. "I can get him," Sarah said, studying the tactical situation.
"There's a reflection in the window across the courtyard.
I can use the angle to place accurate fire without exposing the whole squad."
Her shot was perfect, striking the opposing force sniper with a paint round that would have been lethal in real combat.
The successful engagement allowed the squad to complete their building search and move on to the next objective without casualties. "Outstanding shooting," Tony Salvatore said as they prepared to move to the next position.
"That was some seriously impressive work under pressure."
But the exercise was far from over, and the most challenging scenarios still lay ahead. As the simulation progressed, fatigue began to affect everyone's performance. The combination of physical exertion, sleep deprivation, and constant stress created conditions that mimicked real combat operations. During the second night of the exercise, the squad was assigned to conduct a reconnaissance mission behind enemy lines. The objective was to gather intelligence about enemy positions and capabilities without being detected, a task that required perfect coordination and disciplined movement. Sarah found herself assigned to provide overwatch while other team members moved closer to enemy positions. Her role was to watch for threats and provide covering fire if the mission was compromised. The responsibility was enormous. Her vigilance could mean the difference between mission success and complete failure. Hours passed in tense silence as she maintained watch through her rifle scope, tracking enemy movements and reporting positions to her teammates. The work was mentally exhausting, requiring constant attention to detail and the ability to distinguish between normal activity and potential threats. When enemy forces began moving in patterns that suggested they had detected the squad's presence, Sarah's early warning allowed the team to withdraw before being surrounded. Her steady nerves and accurate reporting had probably saved the entire mission from disaster. Good eyes, Shen, Rodriguez said during the debriefing. Your early warning gave us the time we needed to get out clean. The praise was especially meaningful because it came from someone with real combat experience who understood the difference between training performance and battlefield effectiveness. Rodriguez had been skeptical of Sarah's inclusion in the squad initially, but her consistent performance was gradually changing his assessment. The final phase of the exercise involved a complex rescue mission that required the squad to penetrate enemy defenses, locate simulated hostages, and extract them safely. It was the kind of high-stakes scenario where any mistake could result in mission failure and casualties among team members.
Sarah's role in the rescue operation showcased many of the skills she had developed over months of training.
Her navigation expertise guided the team through complex terrain to reach the objective. Her marksmanship provided precise covering fire during the assault phase. Most importantly, her attention to detail helped identify booby traps and defensive measures that could have derailed the mission.
During the hostage extraction, the squad came under heavy simulated fire from multiple enemy positions.
The scenario was designed to create maximum stress and confusion, testing each soldier's ability to function effectively under extreme pressure. Sarah found herself separated from the main group during the chaos, forced to make independent decisions while maintaining communication with her teammates. Her response to the crisis demonstrated growth and confidence that even her harshest critics had to acknowledge. Instead of panicking or freezing under pressure, she identified an alternate route that allowed her to flank an enemy position and provide supporting fire for the extraction. Her actions directly contributed to the mission's success and potentially saved the lives of simulated hostages. Chen showed real tactical thinking out there, Marcus admitted during the post-mission debriefing. I didn't think she had it in her, but she kept her head when everything went sideways.
The acknowledgement meant more to Sarah than any formal commendation could have.
Marcus had been one of her most vocal critics throughout training, questioning whether someone of her size belonged in military service. For him to publicly recognize her combat effectiveness represented a fundamental shift in attitude that extended throughout the training company. But, even as she celebrated the successful completion of the exercise, Sarah understood that bigger challenges lay ahead. The simulation had been comprehensive and realistic, but it was still training. Real military service would bring situations that no exercise could fully replicate, and she would need to prove herself repeatedly in an environment where mistakes could have permanent consequences. The graduation ceremony was set for the following week, and Fort Braxton buzzed with the nervous energy of recruits who had survived 6 months of intensive military training. Only 73 of the original 96 candidates remained, and those who had made it through felt the quiet pride of soldiers who had proven themselves worthy of the uniform they would soon earn the right to wear permanently. Sarah stood in formation with her training company, watching as final preparations were made for the ceremony that would mark their transition from recruits to soldiers. The past 6 months had transformed her in ways she was still discovering, physically stronger, mentally tougher, and possessed of a confidence that came from surviving challenges she had once thought impossible. The whispers and skeptical looks that had followed her during the early weeks of training had largely disappeared, replaced by the respectful acknowledgement given to soldiers who had earned their place through performance rather than politics. Her test scores remained among the highest in the company, her marksmanship skills had become legendary among her peers, and her tactical thinking had impressed even the most demanding instructors. But it was the previous day's unexpected visitor that had created the most dramatic shift in how her fellow recruits viewed her presence at Fort Braxton. Colonel Harrison had arrived without fanfare or advance notice, appearing suddenly during the final field exercise like a ghost materializing from the morning mist. He was a lean man in his 50s with silver hair and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of his surroundings with military precision. His uniform was immaculate, adorned with ribbons and badges that spoke of service in multiple combat zones and classified operations that would never appear in official records. The colonel had watched the exercise with intense focus, taking notes on a small pad that he returned frequently to his pocket. His presence made everyone nervous. Unannounced visits from senior officers usually meant either recognition for exceptional performance or investigation of serious problems. Since no one was aware of any issues that might have attracted negative attention, the assumption was that someone in the training company had done something remarkable enough to warrant personal observation from a full colonel. Sarah had noticed the colonel's attention seemed particularly focused on her performance during the complex urban warfare scenario that concluded their training program. As she moved through building clearances and provided overwatch for her squad, she could feel his eyes tracking her movements with an intensity that was both flattering and unsettling. After the exercise concluded and the recruits gathered for debriefing, Colonel Harrison approached the group with the measured stride of someone accustomed to command authority. His gaze swept over the assembled soldiers before settling on Sarah with unmistakable recognition. "Shen," he said in a voice that carried across the formation. "Step forward." The command sent a ripple of surprise and curiosity through the group. Sarah approached the colonel with the mixture of pride and nervousness that came from being singled out by senior leadership, uncertain whether the attention was positive or problematic. "Outstanding performance during today's exercise," Harrison said, studying her with the calculating gaze of someone making important decisions. "Your tactical thinking and marksmanship were particularly impressive. Tell me, what are your plans after graduation?" "I haven't received my assignment yet, sir," Sarah replied, maintaining the crisp military bearing that had become second nature after months of training. "I'm hoping for a position where I can best serve the needs of the Army." The colonel nodded thoughtfully, his expression revealing nothing about his assessment or intentions. "Have you given any thought to specialized training opportunities? Advanced schools that might make use of your particular skill set?" The question was intriguing but vague, offering no clear indication of what the colonel might have in mind. Sarah had heard rumors about elite units and specialized training programs, but nothing concrete enough to base career decisions on. "I'm interested in any opportunity to continue learning and serving effectively, sir," she answered carefully. Colonel Harrison smiled slightly, an expression that suggested he approved of her response. "We'll talk more after graduation," he said. "In the meantime, continue the excellent work you've been doing." As the colonel walked away, Sarah rejoined her formation with dozens of questions racing through her mind. The brief conversation had been cryptic but unmistakably positive, suggesting possibilities she hadn't previously considered. Around her, fellow recruits buzzed with speculation about what the interaction might mean and what kind of opportunities might be waiting for her after graduation. "I've never seen a colonel show up just to watch training exercises," David Kim said during the evening discussion in their barracks. "He must have heard something about your performance that got his attention." "Maybe it's about your marksmanship scores," Angela suggested. "Those numbers you've been putting up are seriously impressive." "I heard one of the instructors say he'd never seen consistency like that from a recruit." But it was Marcus Rivera who offered the most intriguing possibility. "My uncle served with a special operations unit," he said quietly. "He told me that's how they sometimes recruit people. Senior officers show up unannounced to watch candidates they've been hearing about. If that's what this is about, you might be looking at some serious opportunities." The speculation continued throughout the evening, but Sarah tried to focus on the immediate challenges of completing training rather than imagining futures that might never materialize. She had learned to be cautious about counting on outcomes that remained uncertain, especially in an environment where circumstances could change rapidly and unpredictably. Graduation day arrived with the crisp autumn weather that made military ceremonies particularly impressive. Families gathered from across the country to witness their sons and daughters receive recognition for completing one of the most challenging training programs in the American military system. The ceremony was held on the parade ground where Sarah had first struggled to keep pace during morning runs that now seemed almost easy in comparison to more recent challenges. Sarah's parents had driven down from their small hometown, her father wearing his own service ribbons with obvious pride as he prepared to watch his daughter follow in his footsteps. Her mother carried a camera and enough enthusiasm to compensate for her limited understanding of military customs and traditions. "I knew you could do it," her father said during the brief family time before the ceremony began. "You've got the Chen family stubborn streak, and that's worth more than size or strength when things get difficult." The graduation ceremony itself was a formal affair designed to mark the transformation from civilian to soldier that defined military service. Drill sergeants who had spent months breaking down and rebuilding the recruits stood with obvious pride as they watched their charges receive recognition for completing the demanding program. When Sarah's name was called to receive her certificate and insignia, the applause from her fellow graduates was genuine and enthusiastic. She had earned their respect through 6 months of consistent performance and quiet professionalism, proving that effectiveness came in many different forms. But, it was after the formal ceremony concluded that the most significant moment of the day occurred. Colonel Harrison approached Sarah and her family as they gathered for post-ceremony celebrations. His presence immediately commanded attention from everyone in the vicinity, and conversations stopped as people recognized the significance of a senior officer making personal contact with a new graduate. "Congratulations, soldier," Harrison said, shaking Sarah's hand with firm warmth. "You've completed an impressive training program and should be proud of your accomplishments." "Thank you, sir," Sarah replied, still uncertain about where the conversation was heading. The colonel turned to acknowledge her parents before focusing his attention back on Sarah. "I'd like to discuss some opportunities that might interest you," he said. "Advanced training programs that could make use of your particular talents." As he spoke, Sarah noticed something that made her heart race with sudden understanding. Partially visible beneath the colonel's shirt collar was the edge of a small tattoo, a serpentine design that she recognized from specialized military literature she had studied during quiet evening hours in the barracks. The Black Viper Insignia. The symbol was legendary within certain military circles, representing one of the most elite and secretive special operations units in the American Armed Forces. Members of the Black Viper unit were recruited from across all military branches based on exceptional skills and psychological profiles that suggested potential for the kind of classified operations that never appeared in official records. Sarah's recognition of the insignia must have shown on her face, because Colonel Harrison's expression shifted slightly with what might have been approval. He glanced around to ensure their conversation wasn't being overheard before speaking in a lower voice. "I think you understand what I'm suggesting," he said quietly. "Your performance over the past 6 months has been remarkable, not just in obvious areas like marksmanship and academics, but in qualities that are much more difficult to evaluate. Adaptability, mental toughness, and the ability to excel despite facing skepticism and disadvantages." The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. The Black Viper unit was so secretive that most soldiers went through entire careers without knowing it existed. To be approached for recruitment was an honor that maybe a few dozen people received each year from across all military services. "The training would be unlike anything you've experienced," Harrison continued. "Much more demanding than basic training, with failure rates that exceed 70%. But, for those who complete the program successfully, it represents opportunities to serve at the highest levels of national security." Around them, other graduation conversations continued normally, families celebrating their soldiers' accomplishments without any awareness of the life-changing discussion taking place just a few feet away. Sarah's parents watched with obvious pride but limited understanding of what the colonel's attention might signify. "I need time to consider the offer," Sarah said, struggling to process the magnitude of what was being presented to her. "Of course," Harrison replied. "Take whatever time you need. If you're interested, contact me within 30 days using the information I'll provide. If not, you'll receive standard assignment orders and continue with a conventional military career that should serve you well." He handed her a plain business card with nothing but a phone number printed in simple black text. No name, no unit designation, no indication of what organization the number might reach. "Congratulations again on completing your training," he said in a normal voice as he prepared to leave. "The Army is fortunate to have soldiers of your caliber." As the colonel walked away, Sarah stood holding the business card while dozens of thoughts and emotions competed for attention in her mind. 6 months earlier, fellow recruits had mocked her for even attempting military training, suggesting she was too small and weak to succeed in a demanding environment designed for larger, stronger soldiers. Now she was being recruited for one of the most elite units in the American military system. The transformation was almost impossible to comprehend. Through 6 months of relentless training, consistent performance, and stubborn refusal to quit when others expected failure, she had not only proven herself worthy of military service but had impressed senior leadership enough to warrant consideration for opportunities that most soldiers never even knew existed. "What did the colonel want?" her father asked as the family prepared to leave the ceremony. "Career counseling," Sarah replied, tucking the business card carefully into her uniform pocket. "Discussing options for my future service." It was technically accurate while revealing nothing about the true nature of the conversation. Some secrets were too important to share, even with family members who deserved to understand the full scope of their daughter's achievements. As they drove away from Fort Braxton, Sarah looked back at the training facility where she had spent 6 months discovering capabilities and strengths she hadn't known she possessed. The journey from mock recruit to elite unit candidate seemed impossible in retrospect, but it had happened through the simple process of refusing to quit when others expected failure. The business card in her pocket represented possibilities she was still trying to comprehend, but whatever decision she made about Colonel Harrison's offer, she knew that the past 6 months had changed her permanently. She was no longer the uncertain young woman who had stepped off the transport bus at the beginning of training. She was a soldier who had earned her place through performance and determination, worthy of respect and recognition regardless of what challenges lay ahead. The Black Viper insignia represented the ultimate validation of her military potential, but, in many ways, the journey itself had been more important than the destination. She had proven that excellence came in many different forms, and that the most important battles were often fought against limitations that existed more in perception than reality.